this. We appreciate it. Let's get back to our list, which the next one of which is best win of the year.
I think Philadelphia. And granted, now you kind of look back at it and you go, well, Philadelphia may not be as good as we thought, or they're not maybe as good as they were last year. But at that time, where the Vikings were at their point in the schedule, their record, I looked at that as a game that I kind of doubted they would win. And they went in there and they handled things the way they should in a tough environment. And I will never ever say that, a regular season game is a revenge game when you lost in the playoffs the previous year, but it was a good, strong win for them, and I think one that kind of propelled them into a better spot in this season.
Here's the interesting thing. Vikings really haven't beaten a good team yet. They've beaten the 49ers. They've beaten the Eagles, who we're not sure is a good team at this point. They've beaten the Cardinals, who aren't any good. They've beaten the Jets, who are collapsing. And they've beaten the Lions, who are collapsing. Yeah. So I'm going to say their best win of the season was a tie at Green Bay.
It might be true. That was such a weird game because
bizarre.
Everybody that walked out of there was unsatisfied.
Yes.
Every Packers fan thought they absolutely should have won, except for the Clay Matthews penalty, which was a bad call. But every Vikings fan thought they should have won, except for Daniel Carlson missing 3 field goals, and including the one that would have been a game winner, and really should have been the easiest one. I think it was, 35 yards or something like that. And, for them to get rid of him after that, I wasn't 100% sure that was going to happen. But given the fact that Dan Bailey was out there, a veteran guy, they've just been around this block too many times since they drafted Blair Walsh, where you're dealing with a guy who you don't know if you can trust. He hasn't proven himself before. Now, Walsh had a spectacular rookie year, but all of a sudden he got inside his own head. Kai Forbath, I think, was decent for them, and I wouldn't have had any problem if they would have stuck with him through this season. But, you just look back at Dan Bailey's history and how long he's been around, how consistent he's been. If this is a team that's going to go to the Super Bowl or contend for it over the next 2 or 3 years, it's tough to do that and rely on a young kicker who you're not sure how he's going to handle the pressure. And if Carlson couldn't handle it in Green Bay, it's going to be tougher for him to handle it in playoff environments in a different stadium. So I get it. That Green Bay game was just strange and bizarre in so many different ways.
And so typical of the rivalry, too, which is why I kind of loved it. I just love the fact those teams just always have these bizarre plays happen against each other constantly.
Yeah.
I still remember the Chris Dishman play.
Yeah, and that's the one I was thinking of, too, immediately when you said that. just kind of rolling off his back. And who was the receiver that made the catch on that one?
That was...
was it...
I don't think it was Sharp. I'm blanking on the guy. Let's see.
It wasn't Greg Jennings either, if that's what you're thinking of. No.
I'll have to look it up as we go.
Yeah. Well, while you're looking that up, I'll go with worst.
Oh, Antonio Freeman.
There we go.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. For me, worst loss. That's just easy. It's the Bills. Yes. That one still confounds me. Everybody says, it was kind of that hangover effect from Everson Griffin the day before, kind of dealing with all of his mental issues. But I don't know. The way that thing just went down, it was just...
Still a terrible loss under any circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. It was strange how many times early in the game Cousins fumbled and had issues and just setting up the Bills' offense. They're going against a rookie quarterback who they normally would do well against, and Josh Allen just perplexes them. They had open runners that the guys just uncovered. Everything about that game was just so bizarre that I had no answers for really what happened in that game.
Since we know what the worst loss was, I'm going to change the category to be different. I'm going to say best loss.
Best loss.
And the best loss was the Rams' loss because of the way McVay exposed them and picked on their tendencies. It prompted Zimmer to change his defense, to adapt, and to realize what people were trying to do to him. Because McVay did it in such a blatant way, Zimmer had to react. And that might benefit this team.
Absolutely will benefit this team. And, the part that I found kind of interesting about that whole dynamic in this season was going into the year and during the offseason, all we heard about and saw in practices, offseason OTAs to training camp, were all these different looks that Zimmer was working on. That, Anthony Barr is going to be more of a defensive end, and there are times they're going to have 5 defensive linemen, 3 defensive line, all of this different stuff, and it really didn't start to happen. A lot of that stuff even hasn't really happened as much as we saw in the offseason. But it kind of, I think, knocked Zimmer back a little bit and said, okay, people have had the offseason to look at my defense and figure out what are the weaknesses. What did Philadelphia do in the NFC Championship game? What did the Saints do in the divisional playoff game in the second half? And there are ways to expose this defense. And I really believe, people around the league, coaches around the league, look at, okay, who are the top defenses in the league from last year? Oh, Vikings were number 1 in defense in several categories. And then you go, let's look at what they're doing, both for maybe how it can help our defense, but also how do you attack that if we end up against them. I think a lot of coaches spent a great deal in the offseason looking at the Vikings, studying them, and figuring it out. And now, to me, the biggest thing that the Vikings have adapted on defense is instead of going with so much of showing that double-A gap blitz with the linebackers, Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks, and, I feel like a lot of fans have this impression that Zimmer's just a blitz-heavy defense. Not really true. He loves to show it and back off.
Yeah, he likes to deceive.
Yep. Well, now what we've seen more of is the outside pressure. They're not sending that double-A gap blitz. They're not even showing it that much, and some of that probably has to do with Barr being out with injury. But, what we saw against the Lions, they had 10 sacks. 9 of those came on a 4-man rush. Yep. But the one that they got on the blitz, they had Harrison Smith lining up on the outside shoulder of Everson Griffin on the left side of the offensive formation. And then over on the right side, you had Eric Kendricks and Mackenzie Alexander. So what they did with Griffin and Harrison Smith, both those guys backed off into coverage, and they ended up sending Alexander and Kendricks in there. Lions are thinking of sending their protection to the side where Griffin and Harrison are. That doesn't work out. They don't. They have too many blockers over there. They don't have enough to cover for Kendricks and Alexander over on the other side. The one blocker picks up Kendricks, and Alexander comes untouched to Matthew Stafford. So I think when you start showing pressure on one side, and it was clear when you go back and look at the film, Matthew Stafford is sitting there, looking at Harrison Smith, looking at Everson Griffin, and despite Mackenzie Alexander kind of showing his hand too quickly, I don't think Stafford ever saw it. I don't think any of the blockers ever saw it. And it just got that free runner. And I think, if you look at those NFL next-gen stats, I think Mackenzie Alexander now has the fastest sack, quickest sack to the quarterback because just absolutely untouched. Yeah. And that's some of what they're going to have to do. And there's a little bit of risk-reward involved in that. But if you can mix that in as a surprise element, it's very effective. So I really agree with you. The best loss is the Rams' loss.
We're live at Twill in the Edina Galleria. You should know where the Edina Galleria is by now. It's on France, just south of 62. It's just a great place to walk around. Good restaurants. You have Barnes & Noble, you have Starbucks. Good place to hang out, and just beautiful shops, the foremost of which, of course, is Twill. Stop by. The staff is very friendly, and it's a very relaxed place. Thanks to our producer, Brandon Morton. If you'd like to advertise anywhere on the network, you can reach me at jsouhan47@gmail.com. Also, I recommend Jeff Diamond's Vikings and NFL Insider as a companion piece to this podcast. Jeff breaks down a lot of the same stuff, but from a different perspective as a former NFL Executive of the Year. It's a really good show. Check that out. That'll be out later this week. And also, thank you to one of our primary sponsors, WhizKids.tech, WhizKids.tech. Let WhizKids.tech be your company's chief technology ally.
Hello, Minnesota sports fans. This is Michael Thanner, founder and CEO of WhizKids. WhizKids is a Minneapolis-based managed IT, hosted VoIP, and cloud services provider. Businesses today require fast response times, skilled support staff, clear communication, and technology recommendations that align with their business goals. At WhizKids, we do this each and every day with our clients. When you call into our help desk for support or work with one of our higher-level engineers on a complex issue, you'll find our staff personable and ready to roll up their sleeves to help you solve your technology problems. Reach out to WhizKids today to find out how we can help your business meet your technology goals. Visit us online at WhizKids.tech. That's WhizKids.tech. WhizKids, make it happen.
All right, so now that we talked about them getting healthy over the bye, how healthy are they?
To me, the biggest concern, and it's not a great game to have this concern, would be David Morgan, who people don't know a lot about, but in the Viking scheme, obviously Kyle Rudolph is their number one tight end and their number one pass receiving tight end. David Morgan's a really good mix of, can get out in some pass patterns, hasn't done a whole lot of receiving yet this year, but he really helps them in the pass protection game. When you're talking about going against the Bears and Khalil Mack, that could be a big one that they're missing. A lot of the other guys I expect to be back. I think Dalvin Cook with his hamstring, he showed that that's pretty good against Detroit. Having an extra week off should help him there. Xavier Rhodes and his foot injury, I think he'll be back. I don't think he's going to be quite 100% yet. Riley Reif was back 2 weeks ago against Detroit. Stephon Diggs and his rib injury, I was actually surprised that he didn't play against Detroit. So my expectation is he will be back. He was in the locker room today on Monday and looked like there was nothing that was giving him real pain. So I don't know how much he actually practiced or how much he will practice this week. Andrew Sendejo, a couple weeks ago, started getting back out on the practice field, so I would assume he'll be ready to go here very soon, maybe even this Sunday. Barr is going to be interesting, though. With his hamstring, I think he'll probably be back, and I'm going to be really curious to see, with the way that Eric Wilson played, obviously Barr's their starter. He's a guy that's going to get the majority of the time, but do they find some areas to work in Eric Wilson, who I think has done a really nice job, especially in pass coverage? I still think when it comes to playing the run, having explosive plays, being a guy that offenses have to account for as a potential blitzer, Barr is the guy over Eric Wilson. But in coverage, if a guy like Trey Burton, for instance, is starting to have some success, is Eric Wilson on the field a little bit more? Or does that mean Jaron Kearse is out there to try to help cover a tight end that might not be a great matchup for Barr or Kendricks? So all that's going to be really interesting. And then Tom Compton, I'm just not really sure where he's at with his knee injury, so we'll have to wait and see how this week of practice goes.
So what do you think the starting offensive line is if Compton's out?
If Compton's out, it's Reif at left tackle, Isadora at left guard, Elflein at center, Mike Remmers at right guard, and I think Brian O'Neill has done absolutely everything that's been asked of him as a rookie right tackle, and I see no reason to put Rashad Hill back in at right tackle if Brian O'Neill continues to play this well.
Now, before the season, I think you and I both agreed that this might not be an easy stretch for this team until they got to the bye, and then they would have a tough stretch coming out of the bye. But I think we both thought they'd be about 5-3, 5-4, 6-3, somewhere in there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I said at the beginning of the year, those first 5 games were very difficult. If they could come out of there, even 2-3, they would still be in it. Now, obviously, I didn't expect Buffalo to be one of the losses, but they did come out of there. What was it, 2-1, I think, after 5 games. So now the issue is, can you handle going on the road a bunch coming out of the bye? Can you handle the primetime games? And, some people may want to downplay that element of it, but when you're traveling and you got night games, the NFL and their players, they're kind of creatures of habit. And, Harrison Smith said today, hey, I'd much rather have a noon game, but I'll play anywhere, anytime. So, if it's primetime, that's what it's going to be. To me, one of the more interesting things about this Chicago game coming up is this is probably one of the biggest games that Mitchell Trubisky has played in.
Yeah.
So how is he going to handle the pressure of primetime game, the whole NFL fandom watching, and really a game that is for the division lead. So I'm curious to see how he does. I mean, he looked tremendous against Detroit, but I kind of feel like the way that the Vikings handled Detroit.
Detroit knows it's over.